Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Ending Physician Overwhelm. We are continuing on the theme of learning today. As I shared in last week's episode, which was episode 191, who will you learn from? We have new opportunities to be learning all of the time, and it's back to school season. And whether or not you're a parent, you are someone who has been through so many years of education that I know that return to school season has some context for your life, whether or not you're actively in learning mode right now. And this idea came to mind. Again, I love continuing on a theme, but I just bought myself a new car, which is fantastic. But it's an electric vehicle. It is different from what I have driven before. It is much more smart feature oriented. And I'm sitting there trying to learn the features of my car alongside my highly tech savvy 13-year-old. If you have a 13-year-old in your life, you probably know where I'm going with this. But this particular 13-year-old in my life does sit and read the manual, does spew out facts, does try and tell me things when I am actively doing something else or, needing to pay attention to the road. And so it really got me in thinking of, it's important to me to learn how to use my car well. It's a lovely car. I enjoy driving it. And there are certain reasons why I bought this particular car, with the ultimate goal of being in alignment with my values and being able to make things easier, because that is what a smart car is about for the consumer. I'm not going to get into the seller side. I don't really care. But when you are thinking about trying to get out of overwhelm, help yourself to be living this life more in your own autonomy, more in your own self-care and self-worth, there is learning to be done. And so we're going to draw out some principles here. We're going to touch on adult learning theory, not because I'm an expert in that, but because I think it's relevant as we consider the conversation of why is it such a challenge to learn how to set boundaries, to learn how to take care of ourselves, to be learning new things that will help to make our lives easier. So if you have struggled with setting boundaries, and maybe you've tried a few things to do and gotten yourself stuck, maybe you have tried to be more engaged with self-care, and again, you hit some kind of a wall, you gave up, you forgot, it was too hard, and you fell back into your old ways. Maybe you've been trying to help yourself make something easier. You know that you should use a new tool. You can see that it's going to make life easier, but you aren't sure how to get started, and you have tech fear. I am here for you, and we are going to navigate this together. So buckle up. All right. So let's review or introduce, if you will, the adult learning principles. I'm not going to belabor this, but I think, again, it's a good place for us to start to think about how we approach learning new things at this point in our lives. Now, I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to assume that you are done with medical school, probably done with residency. You probably have been in practice for some years, maybe not a lot of years, but you are solidly an adult and you are solidly in your career as we talk about this. If that's not you, that's fine. I'm not saying there's nothing you can't learn here, but that is the person that I am speaking to here as we talk about adult learning principles. So when we went to college, when we went to medical school, depending on when you trained, I can tell you absolutely that these principles existed because A, they were really first invented in 1833, according to Google, but B, they really sort of came to attention as they were reframed by, actually, I didn't look up anything about him, but somebody made Malcolm Knowles in the 1980s, right? So I'm going to assume, if you're listening to me talk, that you trained in medicine sometime more recently than the 1980s, even if that's when you absolutely started your career. So just to say that adult learning principles have been present for quite some time, and yet they may not have really truly been a part of your medical learning experience, right? We can all absolutely recognize that medicine is and continues to be highly hierarchical. That's a hard word to say. And the business of medical school has remained such that they may or may not be doing a great job with incorporating adult learning principles. I remember conversations, in medical school, in residency, and when I worked on faculty teaching residents that would touch on adult learning principles here and there. But I'm not sure how much that really, really seemed to be going on as I was sitting in lecture in medical school, especially in the first 2 years, where you're just thrown a bunch of information. But here they are. Here are the principles of adult learning. 1, motivation, specifically internal motivation, which is to say you need to be successful by understanding why is it that I need to learn this information. I think that we could look back and we could see things in our medical school curricula that maybe we had zero internal motivation to study. And we could probably get there if we're like, well, I have to know this stuff because I have to pass a test, because I need a good grade, because I need to progress to other stuff. You think about sort of the basic science curriculum. I'm not saying that there's nothing applicable there, but did you really need to study organic chemistry to be able to take care of human bodies? I would argue probably not. I don't think about organic chemistry as I am seeing patients. Now, could there be some principles underlying that? Sure, but the internal motivation was not high. The external motivation, the desire to get a grade, to get to the next step, right, to be able to graduate, those things are the things that probably pulled you forward more so than internal motivation to actually learn the skill, the knowledge, right, that we are trying to acquire. But again, if we take this back to thinking about learning to set boundaries, learning to take care of ourselves, learning how to intentionally make things easier for ourselves, we want to be internally motivated in order to take the time and effort to learn those things, because learning boundaries is not easy. Learning how to take care of yourself and unlearning the self-sacrificing martyrdom that so many of us have incorporated, it takes effort. But if you can recognize, I want to feel better. I want to feel like I exist in my own life. I need to be able to set some healthy boundaries in order to have space for myself, in order to right size the amount of work that I do, because so many of us are drowning. We're going to need to really understand that motivation. And that is really, really, I'd say, so pressing when it comes to boundaries, because boundaries will come up, right? Opportunities to set boundaries will come up. And if you are not very clear that you need to say no in the moment, or as you're responding to an email or some kind of a request, if you're not very clear as to why you need to set boundaries, I need to say no here because I do not have time to take this on. I need to say no here because it is not reasonable to add anything more to my load. I need to say no here because other people need to be accountable for these things. It's not at the level of my licensure and somebody else should be responsible for it. We need to be very clear. And so it takes a little bit of sitting down. What is my motivation for practicing setting boundaries. So I hope we can see how we can wind that in. But in the moment, when you receive a request to add something else to your plate, if you're not very clear on why you should say no, it is harder to do so. And that is one key reason why people's boundaries, get trampled on. Okay, so internal motivation is a core principle. What's next? Relevance. Now, when they talk about relevance, they're talking about something that is immediately applicable. So I'm going to go back to the car situation. I'm driving. I know that my son has already read the manual because, again, this is the kid that he is. And I asked him a question about something that was going on right now. He could tell me what it was, but then he proceeded to tell me something completely unrelated, and I'm driving. So what I wanted was I need to know where is this button, right? So that I can do the thing right now because it is immediately applicable, right? And he's trying to tell me about setting up some other system or pushing some other button that's related to the parking feature. Not helpful. Now, in his mind, he is someone who just loves to spew facts, right? And he doesn't really appreciate the relevance factor here. But for me, right, in order to be able to learn something new, right, to be able to use this car well so that I can make my life easier, it needs to be immediately relevant or else I'm not going to get it, right? My brain is not going to keep that piece of information. How often have you read a book or a journal article or something trying to get some information? It might be full of all sorts of lovely information that is not immediately applicable. And you think, oh, I really should learn this stuff that's talking about complex kidney disorders. But you don't see complex kidney disorders, and that's not the question that you went for. It's not going to sink in, right? So when you are trying to work on boundaries, when you are trying to work on learning how to do self-care, when you are trying to help make things easier, you want to really help keep things relevant to what you're doing. Can you practice it? Can you immediately apply this? Can't think of an example off the top of my head of how would you do that with boundaries, but just to say, if you are reading about boundaries, if you are working on it, if we are working on it together, if you are reading a book, right, we want to be able to practice it as soon as we can, right? So we got to identify perhaps in advance, what are some opportunities that you have to set a boundary? What are some opportunities that you have to say no, even as practice, even if this thing here is not going to really move the needle, but it's still practice. We want to go back to the car situation. We can think about sitting down with the salespeople, right? And they're trying to push deals, and I was in a scenario where I just went to test drive this car. I wasn't going to buy it right then and there. And, they kept trying to push me. They're like, just sign here. And I'm like, no, it's not what I'm doing right now. It's a hard no. Well, I feel like there's a number we can get to. I'm like, no, please, I'm leaving. I had to wait for them to give me my key back because, of course, it was a trade-in. Anyway, got out of there. But relevance, right? What is immediately applicable? When you think about CME, I've been looking at a couple of conferences that are coming up. They sound like they're fantastic. They last a whole week. They are filled with, I don't know, there's probably 10 lectures per day, 5 days out of that week. That is a traditional CME model, right? Where you go and you learn this explosion of things, right? And in primary care, as I'm sure comes up in other fields, there's going to be lectures about all the different parts of the body. And it's all going to sound like great ideas. None of it is immediately applicable because I'm not sitting there and going to, immediately use that information. I'm not suggesting that these kinds of conferences are not helpful, but and I know how often we have sat in those kind of conferences. We've taken notes, We've said, oh, this is a good idea. I need to turn this into something I'm going to use. And we go home with pages and pages and pages of notes in whatever context that looks like, and you don't use any of it because it's not immediately applicable. You didn't have a chance to practice it. You didn't have a chance to put it into use. That is not something that adults are going to typically get a lot out of, right? We want to keep it relevant. We want to keep it moving. We want to use it right away. When we were talking last week about who do we want to learn from, think about all of these great now online CME courses where you can pace it on your own. That is what I have done for a lot of my obesity training. It's what I've done for a lot of my menopause care training, for a lot of my coach training. I'm able to use it iteratively, and that helps me to, lock it in. Okay, I have a chance to practice this. I have a chance to, offer this new medication to someone. I have a chance to, kind of learn the nitty-gritty of it, right? That is going to serve us better in terms of our learning and rapidly accumulating, skill and expertise compared to going to a 50 different lecture CME series. So as you are thinking through, how do I learn? How do I learn new things, including stuff that's not CME, right? Self-care, boundaries, how to make things easier for yourself. Think about, I need to learn, do, and learn and do, and learn and do, and learn and do. Have a chance to practice it right then and there. All right, that leads us to our next principle, which is experience. The more hands-on your learning is, the better. If you can sit and role play with somebody, if you have a chance to put things into use right away, if you have a chance to try something out, you are going to use it more easily, more better. Lovely phrasing there, right? Because it is practical and in the moment. You think about, again, CME conferences that you go to where they have hands-on model demonstrations where you get to simulate something. When you are able to do that, in a low stakes setting, right, you are going to learn that skill much more easily than if you are watching a lecture, there's no patients in front of you, there's nothing to do with your hands to practice it or to try using the knowledge in some way, right? Hands-on experience matters. That's true too with our self-care, with our boundaries, with our trying to make things easier. I have found as I've really engaged with that practice of trying to make things easier, I do it more and more and more just easily without much thought. Oh, I can make this easier. I can make this easier. Wouldn't this be nice if this were easier? What would make it easier, right? Those are questions that can automatically sort of come to us when we have practiced. So the more hands-on experience you get in figuring these things out in your life, the better things are going to be. Same, with driving this new car. When I'm able to push the right buttons at the right time and make something happen as I drive, and I'm able to get the immediate sort of feedback of it, I'm going to learn that feature much more quickly than something that comes up randomly, like in the snow mode, right? I live in Seattle. I don't have much snow. I hope not to have to use that button very often, but I can 100% guess that I'm going to completely forget that it's there because it's hidden in some other button, right? I'm not going to learn that unless I get a lot of time using it. All right, what is our next feature? Our next feature is task-oriented rather than information. So again, think about when you might have been sitting in lectures, could have been college, could have been med school, could have been didactics during residency. When you're just fed a lot of information and you're not really able to make it task-oriented, it's going to be harder to learn. When I was doing my training in obesity medicine, I happened to be able to take advantage of the timing because it was during the very beginning of the pandemic. Everything had gone online. So there was no experiential component. I didn't have to go and learn with somebody, and there were good things and there were not good things about that. But there's a lot of the more academic nuance that didn't really sink in because it wasn't something that I needed to practice. It wasn't something that was at all task-oriented. And it's not really much of it super relevant. So learning about all the nuanced cortisol disorders is not something that I do, but it's not something that I'm likely to ever do because I'm not at a tertiary academic center. I'm not an endocrinologist, right? I need to have some awareness of, yep, I want to do some basic screening, right? I want to be aware of what a cortisol disorder is going to look like in order to be able to recognize it, as a cause of weight gain. But that is not something that I'm going to be doing. But as I started practicing obesity medicine, as I started using and talking and, gathering those skills, I was able to incorporate them quickly into practice. And those are the things that have stuck with me the most, right? The information that I needed to learn and answer in the moment, being able to find those things, being able to answer and address those things, and enhance them over time, right? Task oriented. So learn to do. There's obviously some, reinforcement here because there's overlaps to these principles, but you can see if we are going to work on learning boundaries, I don't want you to think about all the theory and read all the books behind learning boundaries before you actually practice, right? Being able to learn and practice saying no, being able to sit with the discomfort that occurs when you say no to something that in the past you have felt pressured to say yes to. When you are practicing the discomfort of maybe maybe disappointing another person because you are choosing to go and exercise instead of doing something else. Um, we need to practice. We need to have some experience with that. So just to really appreciate that most of us have probably trained in a much more information sort of glut way where we didn't get to have hands-on until later, that is not in alignment with good adult learning. And so we want to think about if I want to actually be setting boundaries, if I want to actually be taking care of myself, if I want to actually be figuring out how do I make things easier, I'm going to need to practice and I'm going to need to be hands-on, not just read a bunch of books, not just go to a bunch of wellness CMEs, but actually be practicing. What does it mean to take care of my body? What does it mean to try and make things easier, right? We want to learn to do. All right, what's next? Problem solving. Problem solving versus facts. Now, if you're a parent, more likely than not, you have experienced what it's like when your child is reciting facts at you. Now, not to get too gendered here, I have read books that, swear up and down that more male children compared to female children are inclined to recite and learn facts, right? Trivia. You just think about trivia. They know all about this, and will just spit facts at you. That feels like my life for the last 13 years is having facts spit at me. And you might say, well, he's only 13. It's true. I feel this was an early talking child and he had a lot to say. I've had facts spit at me the same way that you have, right? We have learned many facts, but facts are not the same as being able to immediately sort of problem solve. Again, you think about how you take care of patients, how you need to learn how to solve a problem, which is a little bit different for being able to answer questions on a boards test, right? A multiple choice test question, right, is not the same as the human in front of you, right? In this multiple choice test world, there's one correct answer or, a few correct answers sometimes. Here's the human in front of us. They don't present like the textbook. They don't say yes like the STEM question, the question STEM that's the right answer, right? They are a complex human being. They've got things going on in their lives. They've got opinions. They've got biases. They've got different levels of understanding, right? We have to meet them where they are, okay? We have to problem solve. And the more opportunities that you have to problem solve, the better you're going to be able to really learn and adopt, right? This is why I love that question. How can I make this easier? How can I make this easier? When I find myself getting stuck in tasks at work and I'm frustrated or something dumb with my computer or my phone, right? How can I make this easier, right? Who do I need to ask? Is there a YouTube video? Can I read a little snippet of something, right? Rather than sitting here and trying to press the stupid button over and over and over again, right? How can I problem solve and get through this? And hopefully those pathways will wire. When I'm learning to set boundaries, right? And I'm coming up against the same roadblock over and over and over again, I'm going to need to figure out, how do I solve that problem, right? If I am struggling with the discomfort that comes when I say no to somebody and I'm experiencing their emotions back at me, right? How will I problem solve my discomfort rather than telling myself that must mean my boundary is wrong, right? It is normal when we are practicing setting boundaries, when we are practicing setting no, that we will encounter other people's emotions. We've talked about that many times before, but we need to practice and figure out, what will I do so that I stay true to what I want to happen, what I've decided is going to happen, but how will I navigate that discomfort, right? So let's problem solve it. Do I need to move my body? Do I need to just remind myself over and over again, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no, and let silence be there rather than, kind of the blurby explanations that come running out of our mouth. Oh, I'm so sorry. And oh, well, maybe we could do this. And that uncomfortable filling the space, right? If I can stay silent, if I can stay firm and gently remind myself it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no, right? Then I can problem solve the experience of the discomfort, right? We can see how we can apply this. Learning to make things easier, right? What do I need to problem solve? I need to, be actively thinking, I'm sure there's an easier way. I can figure out an easier way. Wouldn't it be nice if I had an easy solution to this recurrent challenge that I have, right? The more we use that question, how can I make this easier? The more it works, and therefore the more relief we get. Okay. We have to practice it, right? We have to continue solving problems rather than just learn some theory and we don't know how to use it. All right. Finally, self-directed, right? Learning needs to be self-directed. And this one, we want to think about, I want to be accountable to myself. Now, when you are working with a coach, right, there's some built-in accountability. And raise your hand if external accountability is helpful to you. I know you're all raising your hands, right? We are so good at being accountable to others. Now, we probably have a hierarchy, right? It might be that you are highly accountable to your patient, your employer, your manager or boss, your chief. There are certain people that you may hold yourself as being highly accountable to. And for a lot of us, we may be less accountable to our spouse or our kids, right? We might, even though we say that family is more important, we might actually be living in a space, right, where work comes first, right? When we are figuring out, how do I start setting boundaries? How do I start learning to care for myself? We're going to need to be self-directed, but we may also need to borrow some external accountability. And that's, again, where working with a coach or being in a group or having a friend that you're accountable, that you can share some accountability responsibility. You can check in with each other. You can say, okay, did you practice? How did it go? What are the wins, right? We can really draw out the experience so it's outside of your brain, right? And we can really see it of how it's going, right? That's where I think there is a lot of benefit from working with a coach, right? And being held accountable, because If you are struggling to follow through with things that you know would be good for you, things you know would open up some more space, but you are struggling to be accountable to yourself and self-directed, right? Then engaging with somebody else who will help hold you accountable and allow you to practice some of that on your own can be real magic. When I'm working with someone, we always talk about wins. And when we talk about wins right at the outset, what I'm asking people to do is to really reflect on their progress, reflect on the things that they practiced or learned. And as we do that, right, I am teaching them covertly to engage with being self-directed because they know that I'm going to ask. They know that I'm going to ask for those wins, especially right up front at the beginning. And so a lot of the people that I work with will start to think about the wins before we get there, or start to think, oh, I know she's going to ask me about that, so I better practice, right? And that is creating some self-accountability because they're being prepared, they're being thoughtful about it. So, yes, I am here on this side, expecting that we're going to talk through it. But on the other hand, they are practicing being accountable to themselves in a way that they have not done before. And it works. It works. It's uncomfortable. It works. Those of you who are listening, who've worked with me, I see this in you all the time, right? You have really been able to say, oh, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And you are doing that work of reflecting and holding yourself accountable because you know that it matters, right? It becomes a self-reinforcing thing. And so being self-directed, having clear motivation for things really is incredibly helpful. But sometimes you need to lean on somebody else to have some external accountability so that you can make progress, because most of us are not used to being accountable to ourselves for ourselves. When it comes to setting boundaries, when it comes to taking care of ourselves, when it comes to trying to make things easier, right? We often give those things up because we are accountable to other people, and there's just only so much room and space and time. So let me rehash what these principles are. And I want you to think, how can I start to use these as I am practicing setting boundaries, as I am learning how to take care of myself, as I am trying to make things easier? Because that is really what we want, right? We want to be able to live our full lives. And it is very challenging to do that when you are at the behest of everyone else's desires for you, because you are a highly incredible, capable person who can do so many things. And you have that attitude of, I can figure this out, or I have to figure this out, has been built into you. That makes you an incredible problem solver, but other people will constantly be leaning on you. We're not going to get them all to stop leaning on us, but we need to build in some time and space for ourselves, for our self-care, for our rest. We need to set boundaries in order to be able to do that. And we're going to need to lean into that question. How can I make things easier? So again, those principles are internal motivation, relevance. We need to make it immediately applicable. It's not just spewing facts about something related to the parking when I'm in the middle of driving. Not helpful. Experience. The more hands-on, the better. The more task-oriented the information is, right? Learning how to use the equation or the app or the information source to be able to answer a question in the moment in the exam room, to be able to care for your patient, is much more helpful than randomly searching for information on UpToDate just for the sake of learning. That's not usually helpful, and that doesn't help us get anywhere, right? We want to be problem solving. How can I use this information and be able to incorporate it as I'm figuring out a problem? And how can I stay self-directed? How can I hold on to accountability to self? Because that is going to help me keep me engaged with learning. My friends, I hope that this has been a helpful walkthrough. Again, the goal here is not to learn the tenets of adult learning, but to really see how we can start to use them as we are figuring out how to take care of ourselves. As we think about, how do I take care of myself, my human self, my self that needs the rest and the self-care and the exercise and the sunlight and the connection with other people, we assume that we should all know how to do it when we were actively taught how to not take care of ourselves in service of other people. You do not need to know how to do that in order to learn how to do that. And these tenets will help get you there. My friends, I hope you have a wonderful week. Again, whether you are involved with people going back to school, whether you're engaged in teaching learners, whether you are just trying to learn things yourself, I hope this has been a helpful discussion. Until next time, take care. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.